Gone Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nigel Farage.
Yes, if you're just tuning in, it is Nigel Farage. I'm here standing in for Ian Dale, doing the drive show between now and Friday. And I guess there are two huge stories today. The floods, which we've just been talking about directly to Houston. But the other big overnight story, and it's a huge story, is that North Korea have fired a missile over Japan. And it is something that Trump says is an unprecedented and grave threat. The 40-minute conversation he had with the Japanese Prime Minister, and clearly, despite many of the things that have been said, the North Koreans are simply not backing down at all. Now, joining me to discuss this is Tina Park. She's a North Korea expert and Vice President of the NATO Association of Canada and Fellow at the Asian Institute of the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. Tina, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So does this missile that was fired overnight over Japanese territory that led to, air raid warnings going off, which must have led to panic and actually people getting texts on their mobile phones saying, go into a bunker, get underground. I mean, does this incident represent a very, very grave escalation of this crisis?
Absolutely. It poses a real threat to not only the population in Japan and the Hokkaido region, but also everybody watching who are immediate neighbors of Japan. So the Korean Peninsula is at the geostrategic center of Northeast Asia with very powerful neighbors like China and Russia, in addition to Japan. And it just raises alarm in the sense that North Korea is progressively testing new weapons with more frequency and also testing different kinds of missiles. This particular missile was launched from a very urban area in Pyongyang near the airport. So the idea that the United States could engage in any surgical military fashion is very much unlikely, given that this was launched out of a civilian site. And also, right after Secretary of State Tillerson mentioned the possibilities for dialogue with North Korea, I think North Korea is saying that they're very much intent on continuing to invest and improve upon their military capabilities.
So the problem we have here is that the US president, and this is prior to this missile going over Japanese space, but prior to all of this, Trump had said that if they carried on with these escalations and began to threaten American space, they would receive fire and fury like the world has never seen. I mean, I think, even by Trump standards, this is pretty dramatic stuff. So, Tina, what happens now? What happens if, the North Koreans continue to provoke in this way? What does Trump do now, having made those threats?
Well, Nigel, I think it's very difficult to predict how President Trump will respond. But what we do know is that we're in the middle of a joint military drill on the Korean Peninsula called Uchi Freedom Guardian Exercise, which is an annual affair between the South Korean forces and the American forces and its allies, which is going to happen for the next few days. And the timing of North Korea's missile launch is very significant precisely because it's right in the middle of the military exercise. And yes, we've heard so much about the rhetoric, exchange of rhetoric between President Trump and the North Korean state media, which has raised a lot of tension, not just for the people on the Korean Peninsula, but all of us watching from outside. And I think President Trump and his advisors and political leaders in Washington will need to seriously assess what they're willing to negotiate with North Korea, because right now, with North Korea testing new missiles, especially targeted towards Japan, dialogue is looking very difficult, and there will be pressure from Japan to be ready, be militarily ready, be more engaging in terms of responding to North Korea's threats. And I think we should be very much alert about the speed with which North Korea has been testing their missiles.
And Tina, it's a very difficult question to answer and a depressing thought in many ways. But do you think with your expertise of this region and the players, do you think inevitably we're headed towards a war of some kind?
Well, Nigel, I am of the opinion that any form of military confrontation on the Korean Peninsula will be deadly. We're looking at a country that is the size of a 100th of the size of Canada in terms of the land size. So in terms of any kind of confrontation between South Korea and North Korea, they have enough conventional weapons to cause a lot of damage within 30 minutes.
Yes.
So I think we're not approaching any closer towards war in the sense that both sides are fully aware of the potential consequences in human terms, in economic terms, and also in terms of chaos and instability it will cause to the region in general. That said, I think we should be very much alarmed by the fact that Kim Jong-un is very much intent on developing new weapons, and North Korea is remarkably successful in improving their military capabilities. Kim Jong-un alone has overseen over 80 missile tests, which is more than his father and grandfather combined in terms of how much North Korea has come through in their military capabilities. And that's something for us to be very concerned about, especially considering that there are millions of people starving in North Korea. So it's a very desperate economy and the ideological regime that is on the brink of collapse. Yet they are threatening the international community with their military capabilities. And that's enough of reason for us to be very concerned about the future of Korea.
And let's just think for one moment, Tina, before I let you go, let's just have a think about the way Donald Trump is handling us. Let's just have a listen with me, remind ourselves of that speech he gave a few weeks ago.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before.
I mean, I assume, Tina, what he means is that if a missile was to threaten American airspace, I'm not sure they've got the capability right yet, but if a missile was to threaten American airspace, that he would launch a strike of some kind. But as you point out, you know, this can't be done surgically because they can have these launching sites all over the place, even in urban areas. Is the American president taking the right route with this?
I think we have to be very careful in terms of the level of rhetoric and the threats that have been exchanged between President Trump and the North Korean state media. And the language like fire and fury is something that North Korea thrives on because the country is built upon ideology and propaganda and strong rhetoric. So, in fact, something like fire and fury reference was introduced by the North Korean regime about 20 years ago about turning Seoul into a sea of fire. So when you have president in the United States who is very much ad hoc in his approach towards foreign policy and who likes to directly engage on very complex issues like the North Korean nuclear threat, we're looking at a very dangerous scenario because there's a very high chance of misunderstanding and miscalculation when you're dealing with a regime like North Korea that has very little to lose and that is very desperate in terms of showcasing its power. So I think moving forward, it would be very important for the United States to exercise prudence and coherence and send a clear message to North Korea in terms of what it's willing to negotiate, and also to not provoke them further because a war of rhetoric between the United States and North Korea will bring nothing that is positive in terms of finding a constructive solution for the serious challenge we face on the Korean Peninsula.
I hope you're right. And how do you think people in Japan are feeling today? I mean, it's 1945, August 1945, 2 nuclear bombs, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and people waking up this morning, you know, to air raid sirens and being told to head for bunkers or cellars. I mean, this surely, psychologically, must be having a big effect on Japan.
Absolutely. I've spoken to some colleagues in Japan who are all very much alarmed. They feel very directly threatened by this latest missile test. And this is also very important from the regional perspective because everything is so close by in terms of proximity between the countries in Northeast Asia that inevitably Japan will call for a stronger approach in terms of dealing with North Korea. And they're already saying that just dialogue alone will not cut it and time for talking is over. So this will only help the Japanese government's position in terms of calling for stronger military response from the United States and also changing the tone from what the South Korean president has been advocating, which is to engage with North Korea towards dialogue and reconciliation. So the latest testing from North Korea, and we've seen many different types of missile testing in the last few weeks, will only raise the sense of alarm in terms of how the Japanese are feeling, in addition to how the Chinese are feeling. The Chinese are very upset about the deployment of THAAD, which is the defense shield system that the United States is introducing with South Korea in the region. And all of these developments coming out of North Korea will encourage a sense of fear and paranoia, and also a realization that we can't just ignore North Korea as a crazy dictatorship that is inventing weapons.
Oh no, Tina. After today, nobody will be ignoring North Korea. I'm absolutely certain of that. Tina Park, North Korean expert, thank you so much for giving us your analysis of this very, very worrying, and I think in some ways a little bit frightening situation with regards to North Korea. Well, President Trump has said if they threaten American space at all, they'll be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. Is this the path to war, or is it the right thing to do? I'm Nigel Farage, standing in for Ian Dale on Drive at LBC. The time is 5:15. North Korea ups the ante and fires a missile over Japanese airspace, leading to the alerts going off, the J alerts going off over large parts of northern Japan, and people being told to head for bunkers or for shelter. It's serious, and this comes in the wake of President Trump speaking a few weeks ago, saying if North Korea was to threaten America in any way at all, they would have upon them unleashed fire and fury like the world has never seen. Is this the path to war, or is Trump right? Do you at some point have to stand up to somebody like this? Is there perhaps a lesson from this that goes back to the 1930s? Perhaps if we'd stopped that Mr. Hitler, who so many in England thought was a very nice fellow in 1933, 4 and 5, a fact that's been very conveniently forgotten by history. Had we stopped him at the Sudetenland in 1936, could we have avoided a massive war in which many tens of millions of people died? Is Trump right to try and encourage the international community to stand up to Korea, and in particular to try and encourage the Chinese to say, look, something has got to be done? And the Chinese themselves overnight, in response to what's happened in Japan, the Chinese government has said that a tipping point approaching a crisis has been reached. So it is a very serious situation, and I'm asking you, is Trump right to take the course of action with North Korea that he has? You can call me. Let me know. Trump right or wrong, 0345 60 60 973. You can text to 84850. And, of course, you can tweet on @LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC. Let's listen to what Prime Minister Theresa May's response has been to what North Korea did overnight.
Well, these action by North Korea is reckless provocation. These are illegal tests, and we strongly condemn them. There will be an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council later this afternoon, and we will continue to work with our international partners to put pressure on North Korea to stop these illegal tests. And, of course, I will have the opportunity on my visit to Japan over the next few days to be discussing these issues with Prime Minister Abe. I'm absolutely clear that trip to Japan will go ahead. It gives me the opportunity to sit down with Prime Minister Abe over the next few days and to discuss the action that North Korea has taken. As I say, these are illegal tests. We strongly condemn them, and we will be working with Japan and other international partners to ensure that pressure is put on North Korea to stop this illegal action.
So it's condemnation the world over for North Korea firing a missile over Japanese airspace overnight. But what, folks, what should Trump do next? He's up the ante with the rhetoric on America being threatened. And I wonder I wonder, what is the best way of putting genuine pressure on North Korea, of getting them to back down, or is it, frankly, impossible? And I'm very keen to know that if you're from Japan, or you've got family and friends living out there, call me and tell me, how you feel about this threat from North Korea. And surely, there just has to be, I would have thought, within Japanese folklore, memories of what happened in August 1945 in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And at no point since then have the air sirens actually, apart from tests, have the air sirens actually been played in Japan. I can imagine people would have been very, very scared indeed. Jimmy says to me by text, America are holding massive war games close to North Korea. North Korea are showing they are ready to fight back. Well, Jimmy, that's right. And indeed, Tina, our expert, was on before making this point, that there are military exercises taking place between the South Koreans and the Americans. But when you get two rivals bidding to show each other who's the strongest, it's a pretty worrying state of affairs. Chris says to me, I don't know what the answer is here, but surely if Trump attacks North Korea, it will only lead to an all-out war with China. This can't even be an option. Well, I think Trump is doing all he can to get China on his side against North Korea. I'm not sure whether that's succeeding or not. I wonder what Al in Camden thinks. Al, hello.
Good afternoon, Nigel. How are you?
Well, I'm okay, but Trump was going to be a non-interventionist president, but clearly he looks at North Korea and believes that it is a genuine threat to world peace, and that's why he said what he said. But is this the right approach, Al?
Well, first, Nigel, I love your charisma. Not that I've always agreed with your thoughts, but I love your charisma.
Right.
What I wanted to ask you, Nigel, is this. If North Korea happened to be a Muslim country, what would the reaction have been by now? Honestly, Nigel, I have to ask you this question. What do you think would happen by now? If a Muslim country conducted itself like the way North Korea is doing now, and I think we pretty much, everyone who's your listener out there, we've got a rough idea what would happen by now.
So you're suggesting that had it been a Muslim country, they'd have bombed it already. Is that what you're saying?
Into smithereens, definitely. All gun blading, all the Western nations, NATO would have been in there and sorted the issue out by now. This is my honest opinion. And I ain't the only one who feels this way.
I'm not sure that's right.
Well, I can't see it. How can North Korea get away with what it's doing and there is no intervention? Don't get me wrong, I'm against violence. I prefer diplomacy, but I just don't understand.
All right, well, look, I don't think you're right. I don't think if North Korea had been Muslim, it would have made, frankly, any difference at all. I think we are at a dangerous situation where the ante's been upped on both sides and where the response to Trump's words was a direct provocation to Japan. So I think we're in a very worrying place. On balance, I have to say, Al, on balance, I do think that, he may not be Mr. Hitler, but can we just stand aside to let this maniac develop his weapons and perhaps genuinely pose a threat to world peace? And I wonder, Al, do you think that the time has come for us to get together with our allies and hopefully the Chinese and to militarily try and neutralise North Korea?
No, I don't, because I think it's going to make it worse, Nigel. What I don't understand, why can't Mr. Trump just pick up the phone and invite this guy into the White House and sit, have dinner and talk? Why is it so difficult? Do
you know what? If he was to do that, it would be a genius move. He went during the presidential campaign, having said what he'd said about Mexico and some Mexicans, and do you remember he went down to Mexico, met the Mexican president, and from a PR perspective, it was a great thing to do. Al, he should extend the hand of friendship and say to Kim, come for dinner at the White House. You'll get a well-done steak with tomato ketchup, and you'll like it. Al, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Ben in Uxbridge is my next caller. So, Al thought that if it was a Muslim country, we'd have bombed it already. Is that right, Ben?
No, it's totally wrong. It's funny enough, I was just saying that actually, if ever a country was deserving of foreign intervention, it would be North Korea. Not because it's to quote a Muslim country, but because its population are effectively kept enslaved and immiserated. You need only read a book by, for example, Escape from Camp 14, which documents someone who was born into one of their labour camps and escaped to one of very, very few, who witnessed his mother and his brother being executed in front of him. It's a country where you know nothing but state propaganda. The average height of a North Korean is 6 inches shorter than that of his South Korean counterpart. They are starving to death in numbers. Estimates range from 250,000 people having been killed through effectively state genocide, effectively, at the lowest end, upwards of 3 million, because they can't get independent media to go anywhere that the state don't want them to see. But so there's a number of reasons why. But isn't the truth, Ben, that the West couldn't care less, really, what's being done to North Koreans by its leadership? It's only when we're threatened that it wants to get involved. No, I don't think that's the case. I think I'd actually love it. It might sound controversial if we did invade, but again, they're allied with China, and so we have to tread very, very carefully. We do. But Ben, would you think the right approach was an invasion or airstrikes, or what should we do? Well, ideally, there wouldn't be any military intervention. That's never a nice thing. But at the same time, I think this is what I mean. Do we sit idly by whilst people are literally in effectively labour camps, enslaved in their hundreds of thousands? Half of their electricity in lighting rooms, whenever you flick on the switch in a hotel room, is likely powered by slave labour. So this is what I mean. I think if ever a term genocide should be rightfully used, it's somewhere like North Korea. Ben, it's a very strong, emotional argument that you make. Thank you very much, Ben in Uxbridge, for your call. I'm asking you, what does Trump do next? With clearly Kim chooses to ignore his threats of fire and fury. Is it time to act, or is it the route to all-out war, and would that be a disaster? I'm Nigel Farage, standing in for Ian Dale on Drive on LBC. It's now 5:30. Trump promises North Korea if they threaten America, they will be responded to with fire and fury like the world has never seen. Well, it's not America that was threatened overnight, but it was Japan that was threatened overnight as the North Koreans fired a missile over Hokkaido Island in Japan. And I'm asking you, what does Trump do next? He's made the threat, at least the threat, on behalf of America. He's done his best to get the international community involved. He even wants to get the Chinese involved, but that's complicated and it's difficult. What is the best way of putting genuine pressure on North Korea, or are we inevitably headed down the road towards a conflict of some kind? I wonder what John in Richmond makes of this great dilemma. John, good evening.
How you doing, Mr. Farage?
I'm doing okay, but I'm not a pacifist, John. I think military intervention is right sometimes. But
I'm not a pacifist myself. I'm a serving soldier.
Yes, okay. Thank you for telling us that. And how would you feel, John, as a serving soldier, if this military conflict with North Korea was to escalate?
Well, there's a couple of things that really wind me up, Mr. Farage, and one of these things is this statement about me joining the army. Apparently I know everything that I've signed up for. As a 16-year-old lad, I really didn't know that, and I've been in the army for 20 years now, and I've been involved in a lot of things that I really don't agree with. And also, I don't like the approach that we've taken to some things in the past. This argument that's going on here at the minute, it's being sensationalised a little bit for me, because I don't think we're on the brink of all-out World War III at all. I do think President Trump's words were maybe poorly chosen, but I do think that they were words that North Korea understand, because it is a rhetoric that they have used for years in the past. So fire and fury is something that they absolutely understand. It's also something that America are good at, because they're not very good at ground operations, if you ask me. I don't think they're good at counterinsurgency operations. I think they're good at creating insurgency. Why is it, John? Every serving soldier I've ever spoken to in the British Army doesn't think the Americans are much good. Well, you know what? The Americans are great. okay? As long as you can pull up somewhere with all your high-tech equipment, plug a Coke machine in, have your free cans of Pepsi on tap, and then just carry on spraying your weapon systems into the vast area. When you have to win hearts and minds, when you have to work with the people on the ground, they're not very good at that at all. But fire and fury, if that's what he's going to do, I think they'll be all over that. I think they can do that. Do I think that's the approach that they need to take? No, I don't at all. But a different approach is needed, because this is nothing new. And I'm not all up on my politics, but I know that before Trump was in power, and there's a lot of people pointing a finger at Trump at the minute, before he was in power, you had Obama with a similar kind of arguments towards North Korea and no action done. You had Bush before him for 2 terms, and again, nothing was done there. And you also had Clinton having the same argument as well. And yet North Korea are still responding in the manner they did, and in the manner that they are. And yes, something does need to be done.
Yes.
But I don't feel at the minute with this launch that America has been threatened.
No.
I had to
I agree with that.
Guam was.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that. America hasn't been directly threatened, but the point is that all the time the ante's being upped on both sides, isn't it?
It is. But I think Japan are well within their rights to respond, not just after this launch, but they've been targeted. They're in that operational area. They're going to be drawn in one way or another if something does go on there. But a lot of the launches have been in their direction, and now this one has gone over them. And as I said before, I had to Google where Guam was, and this missile, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe was on the flight path going towards Guam.
No, it wasn't.
But again, I don't think it's all-out war between Japan and North Korea. There needs to be a different approach that does. And, if it's in terms of protecting yourself, Israel have got a fantastic system there, Iron Dome, I believe it's called. Let's start taking these missiles out in the air. Let's just totally negate North Korea and say, all right, so you're putting all this investment into these missiles, you're going to launch them. Every missile that goes up in the air is going to get taken out in the air. Okay,
but all it would need, John, and you can have every missile shield you want, and I've heard all this stuff that nothing would ever get through, but it only needs one to get through, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course it does. It only needs one to get through, and then this is a worrying thing, because where do you escalate from there? But another thing is as well, it's North Korea, and yet you had the Canadian lady on before, and I struggle to understand her, to be honest with you. But we don't know enough about this place. With people.
Well, we know that it's
in the past.
We know that it's repressive,
like
John.
State. We know it's regressive. We know it's this secretive state. That's something that's used a lot. You know that every time someone's brave enough to go across that landmined area and defect to the south, we know about the things that they say. These people in this country are starving, apparently. These people in this country are ruled by fear. These people in this country don't know what's going on in the outside world. And I think that's where we start. I think if we manage to get a message around that country to the right people, it'd be them. They'd be your best asset and your best ally.
And John, you've served 20 years in the British Army.
I've served 20 years, yeah.
And you're staying on, or what's your situation?
Oh, no, I've had enough.
I'm
finishing my time. I'm getting my pension. I don't want to promote any further. I've had enough. I'm out of here.
Right, OK. Well, we thank you, John, for your service.
No problem.
Even if you were sent into conflicts you didn't always agree with, but I guess that is part of being a serving soldier, isn't it? John, thank you very much indeed for your call. What does Trump do next? Is the time ready for action, or should we wait and see? Ben in Worthing, what do you got to say?
Hi, Nigel.
Hi.
I found myself not very often, I don't think ever, really agreeing with many of the things that you say, but today I found myself kind of agreeing with pretty much most of what you said.
Okay.
I think in many respects North Korea is no different than a petulant child. They're just testing their boundaries. I think, similar to a call said earlier with regards to Muslim countries, I don't think that's necessarily the issue.
No,
I
not
think
right.
It's more that there are no natural resources or anything to be taken from North Korea. Hence, I think there's no real interest to kind of go in and make any changes to the regime in North Korea. Otherwise, something would have been done. In terms of Donald Trump, I think he's kind of acted as I think a few other callers have said, kind of in words and language that North Korea understands. But North Korea, rather than kind of taking that as a provocation, going, let's see how far he can go, and put, a missile towards them, hasn't done that. And he's gone to the next available place. He's gone to Japan. So I think it's down to Japan to maybe kind of react in the same sort of way as kind of Donald Trump has. I think they're just kind of seeing where they can and can't get away. I don't think we're close to World War III. I think as petulant as Kim Jong-un kind of comes across, I think he's very aware of the impact of what could happen. He could essentially lose everything.
Well, if he's rational, Ben, if he's rational, then you're absolutely right, because he will know.
But he's not, yes.
But the sort of slight worry is that he's not rational. Trouble is, Ben, I mean, it was Theodore Roosevelt, over 100 years ago, who said that American foreign policy should be dictated by speaking softly and carrying a big stick. Now, Trump carries a big stick, and that is the US Navy, Army and Air Force. That's a huge stick, but he's certainly not speaking softly, is he? And so where does he go as a leader? Because he said what he said. So if they were to be able or capable of a missile entering Alaskan airspace, for argument's sake, he would almost now have no option, would he, but to respond?
Yes, sort of. I appreciate what you say about Roosevelt, but obviously, that was then, we are now. So the capabilities and the technology has obviously changed. So obviously, the rhetoric has to change with that.
Yeah, but the principles, Ben, don't have to necessarily change, do they?
No, that's very fair. I mean, if it does become possible that North Korea do have something that could potentially enter into Alaskan airspace, then obviously that's something that we're kind of, or America should be kind of prepared for in the first instance. I generally don't believe that that's where it's going to go. I think it's just a child shouting, and then Trump, in this sense, kind of shouting back. And there's not really been a lot of communication backwards and forwards with America since. So it kind of came to a head between the two of them, and it's now North Korea seems to have kind of, in some respects, ignored America, and they're going to their next kind of, well, I'm not getting a response from that person, I'm now going to put something over Japan. And it's now, I think, for Japan to kind of have a much stronger response than they have had so far. So then, I would say, if that was to happen, then there would be like another target for North Korea. It kind of seems like they're just going from one to the next to the next. Well, if Kim Jong-un was as unpredictable as we all believe him to be, then why not test the Americans and how far they're going to go if he's genuinely wanted to go that far and he is as prepared as he says he is?
Well, one good thing, Ben, that's happened overnight is that the number of people really worried about North Korea has grown because the Japanese clearly are, and I would imagine there would have been some real panic in some parts of Hokkaido and northern Japan today. Ben from Worthing, I thank you for your call. I'm Nigel Farage at LBC, standing in for Ian Dale. It's 5:45. So the 45th President of the USA is on the ground in Corpus Christi in Texas, and it's very interesting. He hasn't gone to Houston, and I don't think he was actually welcome in Houston because they have a major emergency on their hands. And it poses a question for leaders, how they should react to disasters. And the one thing that Trump will have absolutely uppermost in his mind is not to repeat the mistakes of 13 years ago. And remember, Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans, devastation, death, and President Trump advised not to visit, advised not to get in the way. So he flew over the devastated, flooded area, and the photograph that appeared in the press was the president looking out of a window from 20,000 feet at the devastation below. And for many, it was seized upon as a wealthy, upper-class Republican being totally out of touch with everyday America. And Trump does not want to make that same mistake, and that's why he's there in Corpus Christi, and in time he'll be there in Houston. And I can promise you he will be front and centre of as much of this as he possibly can. I also think that he will do his best to make promises, to be very generous in terms of compensation. And last we heard, at least 500,000 people are going to qualify for compensation of some kind. Although, I have to say, having spoken to correspondents on this show tonight, given that levees are breaking on banks, and as you just heard on the news, that one of the dams is now, on the verge of breaking, that number could increase very significantly indeed. I'm asking you to answer a question for me. Given that the North Koreans fired a missile over Japanese airspace overnight, triggering off air raid sirens, I'm asking you, what should Trump do next? He's told them, if America's threatened, it's fire and fury like the world has never seen. Let me know, what should Trump do next? The number is 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC. Simon in Northampton, what should Trump do next, if anything?
Hi, Nigel. Good to speak to you.
Hello.
Thanks for taking the call. Nigel, you talked earlier about him inviting Kim Jong for a steak in the White House.
Yes.
I don't believe he should be inviting him there for a steak. He needs, and I forget, unfortunately, the president's name, but the Prime Minister of China.
Xi.
He's the guy, Lee, that's it.
Yeah,
he
Xi.
is the guy that I believe Trump needs to deal and engage with next. I work for a company who manufactures in China, along with other British companies and other companies from around the world. And you can clearly see over the last however many years, China is looking to open its trade with the world. How badly does China really need that trade with North Korea? He should be inviting Premier Lee to the White House for a steak. He should be, basically, his next step should be dealing with some sort of pact or treaty with China to get them on side. And then, because let's face it, Kim Jong-un isn't going to be travelling to Washington anytime soon. No,
I know that. I know that. I know that. It was a suggestion.
The guy's mad. I mean,
it was a suggestion from a caller, and Simon, as a gesture, it would certainly wrong foot the North Korean regime, but I don't see it being accepted either. No, I understand that.
And I think what I think is valuable to the rest of the world is the global trade that the world can have with China. Let's be honest. You look at all the goods in the world. How much of it is produced in China? A hell of a lot. And actually, you know what? Let's get that in. Let's get that lined up. Get Trump to be on the right side with China. And then, frankly, if another missile comes over Japan or, God forbid, goes anywhere else, you're not then in an issue where you're having to deal with potentially China being allied with North Korea. That for me is a big
Simon,
concern.
The one thing you can be certain of is that both President Trump and Secretary of State Tillerson, they have been working very, very hard with China. Lots of phone calls, lots of things going on. They're doing their utmost to get China to join them and to be very tough with North Korea. Most of the Chinese statements that we've had since Trump made his fire and fury speech, most of them have indicated that they kind of thought the Trump rhetoric at this stage had gone a bit too far, although I do note that overnight the Chinese regime says that that North Korea has reached a tipping point approaching a crisis. So Simon, you're absolutely right that in so many ways China is the absolute key to this, and I do think that the Trump regime are acutely aware of it. Let's hope, Simon, they succeed, and thank you very much indeed for the call. And our next caller is from Moscow. Alex in Moscow. Hello.
Hello.
Hello,
Nigel.
So, what's got to happen next, Alex?
I think this can be a very serious conflict about this. And I would like to ask you about, you put the question, what Trump should do in this situation. But why don't you ask about Kim Jong-un, what he can do in this situation?
Well,
except testing himself and
well, I'm not sure, Alex. I'm not sure, Alex, that when it comes to Kim Jong-un, I'm not sure we're dealing with a rationalist. I mean, that's what worries me. I worry we're dealing with a maniac. Who doesn't actually see logic, and it's almost as if, it may be right. I mean, a previous caller said they're behaving like children, and it's sort of, the ante is being upped on either side. So I can't presuppose for a moment what the North Koreans are going to do, but it's what the Americans do, perhaps, that interests me. I mean, what do you think they should do?
But if you just for a second think that he would like to protect his country or something like this, what he can do in this situation?
Well, I mean, Trump's been clear. If America's threatened, they're going to respond. End of. And he couldn't back down from that without losing all credibility completely. I guess the question is, and let's assume for a moment that Kim is a rationalist. You know, does he feel threatened by the American presence in South Korea? Perhaps he does. Could there possibly be a compromise of any kind between these two? Alex, I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect that we are in a situation that is going to continue to deteriorate. That is my concern. And of course, the Americans have also been asking the Russian administration to put some very severe trade sanctions on North Korea as well, because there was a bit of worker exchange going on between Russia and between North Korea. Let's see where we go. I thank you very much indeed for that. We're out of time on that. It's a huge debate. It's an issue that is not going to go away in a hurry. I have always taken the view that we're dealing with somebody very dangerous in terms of North Korea, its threat to the world. What they've done to Japan overnight, I think, is pretty worrying and in some ways pretty frightening. Maybe Trump went a little bit far with the rhetoric 2 or 3 weeks ago. We're not headed imminently for a war, but I do think at some point in time we are probably headed for a conflict. I don't say that with any pleasure at all. And coming up next, well, Downing Street has said that the government will not back away from its demand to kick off negotiations on a post-Brexit trade deal as soon as possible. But, of course, Jean-Claude Juncker has slapped it down completely today by saying we need to be crystal clear. We will commence no negotiations on the new relationship over economics and trade between the UK and the EU until all of the other questions are resolved. They want a big divorce bill. They want the future of EU citizens guaranteed. We're at stalemate. What do you think would constitute a sensible compromise? Call me on 0345 60 60 973.